Found Duckling by EvaDragon. Chapter 9. Attack on the UN Summit. Summary. The UN Summit. The Fenton parents do something incredibly stupid. Danny was sandwiched between Tim and Jason on the couch. After all, he was still recovering from his bout of ghost flu and whatever he'd done to get rid of the corrupted ectoplasm in Jason. Danny was settled on the Chase lounge next to Damien. The rest of the family had gathered and settled on the various bits of furniture and were facing the large screen TV. Today was the day. The UN Summit about the Anti-Ecto Control Acts. It was a full General Assembly, and it was an emergency session. This was it. This was the deciding factor of literally both Danny and Danny's life or half-life. The only person missing was Bruce, but he was playing an important role somewhere else, and everyone understood exactly how important his role was. Welcome all representatives to the 77th emergency session of the UN General Assembly. This will be a full session. The welcome was repeated in about 7 different languages. It would have taken far too long to repeat in all 200 languages of the nations represented. Most of the representatives had translators tucked in their ears anyways. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman stood to the side of the stage. The UN president stood up and called the assembly to order. Today, a serious matter has been brought to our attention by our friends in the Justice League. Around 2 years ago, the United States of America and Canada passed a series of laws named the Anti-Ectoplasmic Control Acts. A gasp went through the gathered representatives. The wording of these acts state that any beings who use, are contaminated with, or produce a substance known as ectoplasm are to be turned over to the agency known as the Ghost Investigation Ward for containment, experimentation, and eventual extermination. A shout of outrage went through the assembly room. The representatives of both the US and Canada were looking decidedly uncomfortable. Either they hadn't actually read the exact verbiage of the acts, or they were willfully ignorant to their respective countries' potential genocidal acts. Do the representatives of either country have anything to say about these horrendous acts before we put the matter to vote before the full assembly? The chosen representative, Representative Obert from Canada, spoke first. President McIntosh rest assured Canada will repeal these acts and will do everything in our power to disband and take down this ghost investigation ward. We will endeavor to work with the Justice League to ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice. They should never have been passed to begin with. They go against everything in the Meta Protection Acts and everything that we as a nation stand for. The chosen representative for the U.S. had a thoughtful look on her face before she spoke. The acts and the Ghost Investigation Ward have kept us safe from beings far more powerful than we could ever imagine, began Representative Gonzalez. By what measurement, Representative Gonzalez? So far, the only known research comes from 2 very biased so-called ectobiologists, whose papers are so full of drivel, prejudices, downright rot, it was any wonder that they were even published at all. By all accounts, the only known town that has ever encountered any ecto entities is a small town in central Illinois called Amity Park. The UN president countered. Yes, that is true, conceded the U.S. representative. Have you even read the acts? The U.S. representative showed her head in the negative. Have you, personally, encountered one of these ghosts or ecto entities? Another head shake. And yet you presume to lecture this assembly on beings who are presumably all-powerful based on the so-called research of 2 crackpot scientists and a frankly shady government organization. The U.S. representative flushed a deep pink in embarrassment. Before any more arguments could be heard, there was a commotion at the door, and then it was burst open. A behemoth of a man in was that an orange hazmat suit? Ran in. He was followed by a woman in teal, and yes, that was indeed a hazmat suit. They were followed by several people in white suits. Who were white anymore? All of them had some sort of strange black goggles on their head. Back in the Wayne's sitting room, Danny was in a state of shock. He knew his pair, Jack and Maddie, were likely to do something, but he really hadn't expected this. He truly hadn't thought that they'd been this stupid. There'd be no saving them. He'd gotten a frantic call from Tucker that they disappeared from Amity Park and that most of the GIW had also pulled out, but no one could track their movements. Denny's mouth dropped open in shock, and both Jason and Tim crowded as close as they could into his personal space. At least Steph's dad was only a minor villain and stayed local to Gotham. This went so far beyond minor villain and skyrocketed right into supervillain territory. Like they would forever be on the entire Justice League's watch list type of supervillainy, if they didn't end up in Blackgate or some other federal prison. Bruce wouldn't even need to fight them for custody of Danny at this point. "Those ghost scum have manipulated you," Maddie yelled. Fortunately, Batman had anticipated something like this and had multiple members of the Justice League on standby as security. All 4 of the Green Lanterns swept in and started containing the white-suited agents, or operatives as they called themselves. Nightwing and Flash had set up a containment area for them to be brought to and were setting up something like an identification process. Superman himself was holding down Jack, while Wonder Woman had used her lasso on Maddie. "You can't do this. You're making a mistake," Maddie yelled while struggling against her restraints. "Why do you think so?" Wonder Woman asked, her voice calm. "Ghosts are nothing but post-human emotions imprinted on ectoplasm. Those ghost scum are manipulating you," Maddie attempted to explain. She knew that if she could get Wonder Woman to see that she was right, then everything would go back to the way it should be. "They're vile and evil." "How can emotions manipulate others?" Wonder Woman asked, still in that calm voice. "Because they're evil," Maddie maintained. "So you've said, but emotions in and of themselves are not evil and cannot think. Anger is not evil. It needs intention and direction. Same could be said for hatred, sorrow, or even joy and happiness. None of those are evil as they stand by themselves. None of those things can manipulate another. There must be something behind the emotion for manipulation to occur. There must be thought of some kind to give the emotion its forward motion," Wonder Woman explained as if she were explaining something to a small child. Maddie stilled. The entire assembly stilled. Wonder Woman had a point. Representative Gonzalez looked like she was actively sucking a lemon. Wonder Woman held out her hand, and Batman handed her a report. "This is a report from your hometown, Amity Park, Illinois. In all of the ghost attacks, a total of $543,000 American dollars were reported in property damage from the actual ghost attack. However, Dr. Madeline Fenton, between yourself and Dr. Jackson Fenton, and the Ghost Investigation Ward, a total of $2.5 million American dollars was reported in structural or property damage, and this was usually incurred after the ghost attack had been otherwise contained by the hero Phantom." Maddie looked down in shame. "Furthermore, we have received reports that your local news station includes something called Fenton Watch on the daily weather report, which was whether or not Dr. Jackson Fenton would be driving that day, since his driving, with or without ghost attacks, was known to cause significant property damage." Back at the Waynes, the sitting room erupted into howls of laughter. Tucker had sent Danny the saved videos of the Fenton Watch reports, which had also included some of the actual recording of Jack's driving. The Waynes had all been amazed that Danny had survived as long as he did. The portal accident notwithstanding, since the GAV had been the Fenton's daily driving vehicle in addition to their ghost hunting vehicle. In all of the actual ghost attacks, as long as Phantom himself responded, there was not a single casualty, nor even a major human injury. Minor injuries were reported, such as a few lacerations, minor broken bones, and general bumps, scrapes, and bruises. Those are to be expected in any sort of rogue or villain attack. However, the same could not be said when either yourself, Jackson Fenton, or the Ghost Investigation Ward responded to the ghost attacks. From yourself and Jackson Fenton responding, there were reports of at least 78 major or life-threatening injuries, including 3 permanent injuries that resulted in the victim either needing a wheelchair or other ambulatory device for the rest of their lives, and 1 death. Maddie gasped and jerked. Jack slumped in Superman's hold. The Ghost Investigation Ward's reports are much more severe. 103 severe injuries, of which 8 were permanent, 14 deaths. Like the shot heard around the world that started the American Revolution, this was the silence heard around the world. Maddie was breathing heavily. It wasn't supposed to be this way. It wasn't. So tell me, how was Phantom, a supposed imprint of emotions on ectoplasm, able to keep the amount of property damage and severity of human casualty and prevent human death if there was no thought there? This tells me that all of your research is wrong. This tells me that Phantom cares for humans in a way that you, Madeline, do not. Wonder Woman said, still in that calm, teaching voice. But those around her recognized the threat and shrank back from her. No, that's not... Maddie began. Wonder Woman quirked an eyebrow up at her. Maddie fell silent. Representative Gonzalez, before we were interrupted, I believe you were about to vote on whether or not the Anti-Ectoplasmic Control Acts would be repealed and the Ghost Investigation Ward be disbanded, and also investigated for their crimes against the Meta Protection Acts, Wonder Woman said, dismissing Maddie and Jack into the custody of the Lanterns, who were finishing securing the operatives of the GIW. Yes. I believe that the U.S. should repeal the acts and an investigation conducted post-haste. Gonzalez stammered. She had felt so sure, so secure when she had walked into this assembly, and now she felt wrong-footed somehow, adrift in a sea without a life raft or life preserver. For a final vote, all countries will now be presented with the opportunity to vote on this matter. President McIntosh called the meeting to order. It was no surprise that an overwhelming majority voted to repeal the acts and have the Ghost Investigation Ward disbanded and investigated. They were to be turned over to the Lanterns since they had committed what was essentially an interdimensional war crime. Same with the Fentons, since they were the ones who had turned Phantom, the Ghost King, over to the Ghost Investigation Ward. Little did the Fentons know that Bruce Wayne would be adding charges to them. Danny was in a state of shock. In one fell swoop, Wonder Woman had managed to change the world's opinion on ghosts. Granted, his pair, Jack and Maddie, were likely going to prison, but he wasn't too sure how he felt about that. But even so, she, Wonder Woman, had with a few vicious, or at least vicious to him, words, turned their entire perception on its head. Maddie looked wrecked, like she hadn't known what to think anymore, and Jack looked like he'd had some kind of epiphany. Jason and Tim still pressed close to their brother, and shockingly, Damien pressed closer to Danny. The rest of the family were happy that Danny could, if he wanted, be a part of their life, but also he could just be himself without having to worry about being hunted. They could officially announce to the world the newest additions to the Wayne family without having to worry about any repercussions beyond normal Gotham craziness. There was always the chance of a rogue attack. It was Gotham. A rogue attack was almost a given, especially if they were announcing new Waynes, but they wouldn't have to deal with Danny or Danny specifically being targeted. Danny didn't realize how much stress he'd been under. Would you like to, see it? My phantom form, I mean? He asked, suddenly itching to show his family. He knew that Tim, Dick, and Jason had already seen it, but the others hadn't, and he had a sudden need, an urge to show them. There was a resounding chorus of yes throughout the room. Danny got up off the couch and moved to the middle of the room. He warned his family that his transformation was going to be bright, and Duke, especially, may need to either look away or close his eyes. He shook out his limbs, and then he let his transformation wash over him. Ethereal white rings washed over him. They started at his waist and split and went head to toe. His whole color palette inverted. He was no longer wearing his comfy lounge pants and t-shirts. He was now wearing his white boots, black pants with a neon green stripe, black plated armor with his DP logo on the chest, and his white fingerless gloves. His white hair floated as if it were underwater, and his bright green eyes looked around the room curiously. His ears were pointed like an elf's, and his skin was blue tinted. The only things missing were the crown, the ring, and the cape, but overall, it was still Danny. "Wow," Steph breathed out, being the first to break the reverent silence that had fallen over the room. "That's so cool." And then chaos reigned supreme. Not even Alfred could control it. Danny had never felt better. Notes: UN President. See this? This is bad. Do you agree? Canada. Yes, we agree. US. No, about that. UN President. Did you do your homework? US. Maybe. Fenton's. Attack! Boss music playing in the background. WW. You're stupid and wrong, and there's 1,000,001 reasons why.